Welcome to the Work Trends podcast from Talent Culture. I'm your host, Megan Mbiro. Every week, I interview interesting people who are reimagining work. And be sure to check out our Work Trends Twitter chat events calendar located at talentculture.com on the podcast page. Welcome to the Talent Culture Work Trends podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about balancing security with employee experience. Now, I know for a lot of you out there, when you hear the words security, your mind probably goes straight to things like passwords and data encryption. But in reality, security is so much more than that. It's about creating a workplace where employees feel safe, protected, while also ensuring that the systems and data are secure, of course. With more of you working from home, more of us, the risk of data breaches is only going to increase. In a survey of 200 IT experts, Okta discovered that at least 74% of them feel that security concerns are the biggest challenge during the pandemic. However, a close 68% also think that the team culture and morale is the single biggest challenge. So, how do we balance the need for security with the need for employee welfare, productivity, and, of course, satisfaction? So, I invited Dennis O'Shea from Mobile Mentor to help us think through this question. This is a really tricky one, but I'm sure we're going to be just a bit more enlightened right after this conversation. Dennis founded Mobile Mentor in New Zealand in 2004. Since then, the company has helped millions of people unlock the full potential of their technology. In 2017, he moved to Nashville, Tennessee, to launch the company's U.S. business, with a focus on securing the mobile workforce in industries like healthcare, education, finance, and government services. Welcome to the show, Dennis. I am so excited about this episode, especially the fact that you're over in Nashville. That's one of my favorite places.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you so much for having me on your show. And I've got to say, I've lived in many different parts of the world, and living in Nashville, Tennessee, it will be one of my highlight locations. It's an absolutely fabulous place.
Culture, music, decent weather, right?
Great weather. It's, I think, 70 something today in early March. So fabulous climate, really friendly people. Southern hospitality is real, I found out. Even in business, it's very real. And it's just a wonderful place to live and work.
Well, excited that you're here. Let's just dive right in. I know you and I got tons to talk about. So, do you think it's possible to have both a great employee experience and strong security measures? Like, is that even something we can consider?
It is something we can aspire to. It has not been easy in the past because employers often had to make compromises and either put security first or put the employee experience first. But now the technology is mature enough, the technology in our lives, that we can actually be secure and still have a great experience without compromising one or the other.
I think it's kind of easier said than done. You know what I mean?
It is. It's much easier to say it than do it. And therein lies the challenge.
Exactly. I mean, talk to us about real life cases where companies can compromise security in order to actually improve the employee experience.
The one that is probably most common is the use of personally owned devices. So we see this very common in healthcare, education, even in government nowadays, where employees are using personal laptops, personal iPads, certainly personal smartphones. And initially that presented a huge security challenge to the organization. You know, how can our data possibly be secure on the device owned by an employee? That was a challenge for many, many years. And nowadays, companies can actually secure the data and still allow the employee to use their personal phone or tablet or laptop. So we've come a long way. And of course, what that enables people to do is to work from home, use personal devices, access their company's resources, be productive, and have a great experience using the technology they choose to use rather than technology that's kind of forced upon them by their IT department. But we can do that securely now in a way that we couldn't a few years ago. Or if we did a few years ago, it presented a huge amount of friction between IT and the end user around how that device was being secured and managed. But there are much more elegant ways of dealing with that situation today.
Where does company size or geography fit into this equation?
That's a really interesting one. Geography mattered a lot in the past because companies typically kind of set up a security perimeter for the employees in their office or around their office. And what we've seen, of course, in the last 2 years is that the majority of the workforce is now out in suburbia, in homes, working in home offices and on domestic grade Wi-Fi. You know, we're all on our domestic AT&T or Verizon or Comcast connection, which is being shared with our kids and my house, the TikTok generation and the Fortnite generation. And so we've seen this massive shift from companies being geographically grounded in one area to suddenly being massively dispersed. And that brings a whole new raft of challenges for companies to deal with, both from an experience perspective and a security perspective.
What are like the worst case scenarios you've seen out there? Or on the other side of this, what are the best ones?
Let me start with the worst case, because they're really interesting. One of the things that happened through the pandemic was this big global chip shortage, where companies just could not buy laptops or tablets or desktop computers, whatever. And so they had to allow their employees to use personal devices. And when that's not set up properly, and when companies just kind of fall into it, then you can have a disaster. We call it, instead of BYOD, bring your own device, we call it bring your own disaster. And they end up in a situation where company information, so that could be healthcare records, student records, financial information, is on an unmanaged laptop or an unmanaged tablet. And the real worst case scenario is where the employee goes to the App Store and they download some apps from, Apple App Store or the Google Play Store. And now they're using an unmanaged app on an unmanaged device to do their work. And so their data is effectively out in the wild. The company data is out in the wild. Meanwhile, we're seeing a massive increase in cybercrime all through the pandemic. So a 500% increase in crime. So we have these awful cyber attacks going after us and our employees and our companies, trying to get our data, trying to encrypt our data and hold us hostage to pay ransoms. And that data is now more exposed and more vulnerable than ever, being on unmanaged devices out in the community, on consumer grade Wi-Fi connections. And this is part of the reason why we've seen the very tragic rise in ransoms and security breaches and data leaks. Because we're exposed. We have been exposed through the pandemic. So that, I would say, is kind of the worst case scenario. The best case is where companies and government organizations and schools and hospitals are very deliberate and recognize that their employees do want to work on their personal devices. They do want to work from home, and we need to put some safety around our data, even if we cannot manage the device belong to our employees. And we need to empower people to be able to work securely on any device, anywhere, anytime. And organizations who've done that well and been deliberate about it can then have a great employee experience, really empowered, motivated employees. And yet they're protecting what's most important, their patient data or their student data, in a way that's sensible.
So how do you know you're doing it right when you're striking that right balance between security and employee experience?
Well, your employees will tell you, and you'll have fewer complaints and fewer people really complaining about some of the things that they might perceive to be impediments. But from a technical perspective, what companies can do is kind of scan all the applications and services their employees are using. So for example, if you're a company and you say, hey, we're going to be using the Microsoft Office applications, Excel and Word and Outlook and Teams and all that. And if you find that your employees are actually using Dropbox and Gmail to do their collaboration, then you've got a problem. You know that either there was too much security or not enough empowerment for your employees, so they've gone and taken matters into their own hands and started doing IT and doing collaboration their own way. And it's so easy nowadays, just pull out your credit card and sign up for some service or some account, and you start running your own little IT function within a team. And we call that shadow IT. So you're not using the tools and the services that your company's provided, but people are kind of breaking away and doing their own thing. And so when companies see that happening, that really means, hey, we failed. We have not given our people the tools that empower them and give them a great experience. So they're going off and doing other things. And conversely, if you're not seeing evidence of those tools, you know that you're doing some things right.
So how should companies balance this all, right? We need security. We need employee experience. Is there a pie chart we can go to? Like, where do we see this visually?
It's very hard to visualize it, but it's very easy to experience it. And the advice that I would give companies is to really lean into their remote workers, because we can learn so much from how people have adapted to remote work. And all the study we've done shows that remote workers actually have a better grasp on technology. You know, if they're working from home on a long-term basis, they're slightly more tech savvy than people in an office environment because they've had to figure out solutions. They're also more aware of security and privacy. So we think when companies really listen to their remote employees and involve them in the decision-making process around new products or new processes, they can learn a lot. Because if they get it wrong, remote workers are the first people that will break the rules and work around whatever companies have put in place. But if you kind of bring those remote workers into the tent and say, hey, we're trying to figure out the next generation of tools or technology or processes or how we empower our employees, remote workers will have a lot of the answers.
Let's talk about some basic measures that companies often overlook when thinking about making people feel safe and secure.
That's a really good point, because communication and messaging around this is super important. And what we found through our research is that people have a very different set of priorities. You know, employees have a very different set of priorities to their employers. And one of the research questions we asked in 2021 was, what do you prioritize most, your personal privacy or your company security? And guess what? 80-something% of the population told us they value and they prioritize their personal privacy.
Surprise!
There you go. But when you think about companies that are banging on about security and trying to enforce security policies and security awareness training, some generations are almost deaf to that and blind to it. And the one that's really interesting to me is Gen Z. So that generation between 20 and 23 years old, a lot of them came into the workforce over the last 2 years during the pandemic. Some of them were onboarded remotely and only work remotely, and they never knew an office-based work culture in the way most of us did. Now, their worldview is very, very different. They see the whole world through the lens of their personal privacy, and they don't really care too much about company security. So what we've learned by listening to them is that if we package the messaging differently, people listen. So for example, instead of banging on about security measures or policies, if we say, hey, what we're doing is to protect your personal privacy. We want to make sure your data doesn't get leaked in any way. Same for your colleagues and same for our customers. We have a duty to protect everyone's personal data. And by doing that, they're listening because it starts with them and their personal data. And so we like to treat privacy and security as two sides of the same coin, but use privacy as the umbrella, as the theme to communicate to people about the importance of protecting information and being secure.
Because at the heart of it, a lot of us care a lot about ourselves in context to the larger world around us. So I love the fact that you're like, just listen to what people are motivated by, because we're not going to change them, but we can inspire them, right?
Exactly. And if you think about Gen Z, they're a super interesting bunch. So they're the only generation alive that cannot remember 9/11. So we all remember exactly where we were, what we were doing, who we were with. They don't. They were in nappies. And they grew up in an era of innocence in a way that we didn't. And they've come into the workforce and they bring a different set of priorities and a different set of attitudes. And as we watch them now start to drift into the office in a post-pandemic setting, and over the next few years, as we watch them get promoted and get bigger jobs and eventually become managers, we believe the best predictor of the future is to study Gen Z, because companies cannot change their attitudes. Their attitudes will prevail and they'll get promoted and they'll eventually become a dominant force. And so the more we can learn to understand them and harness their energies and help them package our messaging and enable them to help us choose the right tools, the right ways to collaborate, the right ways to communicate in companies, the better we'll be able to retain them, for starters, and secondly, empower them to do great work.
And for you leaders out there who are hiring Gen Z, do me a favor. Can you please think about employee experience in a new and more exciting and refreshing way, let's all care, because Dennis, you're absolutely right. This is happening and it's going to continue to, and that is the future of work. Dennis O'Shea. I love that last name, by the way.
Thank you. I've had it for a long time.
Getting ready to party in Nashville for St. Patty's Day, or are we still sort of playing it safe? I know everybody, we're still in a pandemic, but it is St. Patrick's Day coming up. Come on.
You've got it. I'm triple vax and I've had COVID. So my wife said, let's party. So we're inviting a whole bunch of people around and we're going to have a party for the first time in 2 or 3 years. So I am so excited.
Good for you. And you know what? You can always go outdoors because you're lucky over there in Nashville with all that nice weather. I mean, I know it's winter still for all of us, but we can dream, right?
We can. And we'll have an outside fire going, and hopefully it'll be a balmy evening. And yeah, nothing's going to stop us. I'm Irish, so partying on St. Patrick's Day doesn't require a lot of effort.
There you go. Dennis O'Shea, thanks for being you.
Thank you, Megan. It's a fantastic privilege to be on your podcast. I've listened to quite a few of them, and I really appreciate this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you for spending time listening to this Work Trends podcast. I hope it's your favorite source for all that's new and exciting in the world of work. If you love what we do here, make sure to share our podcast with your friends, your colleagues, your family, and don't forget to tune in for our next episode. Catch up with you next time. Thanks to listening to Work Trends from Talent Culture. Join us every Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern for a live Twitter chat with our podcast guest. To learn more about guests featured on today's show, visit the show notes for this episode at talentculture.com and help us spread the word. Subscribe to Work Trends wherever you listen to podcasts. Leave us a rating, review in iTunes. Share Work Trends with your coworkers, your friends. Look forward to it. See you next time.